what I find happens is that the mind really tries to keep us safe from the deeper emotions. And so oftentimes we'll make a map of how do I feel about this? And then we actually use a lot of somatic practices for people to learn how do I build my window of tolerance for some of these feelings that I keep avoiding, that I keep moving away from. And so sometimes we start small, and I will actually just have people using kind of visualization techniques go toward the energy and start creating curiosity for judgment. How do we get curious about what's here? How do we just build your window of tolerance of sitting in this discomfort in your body so that we can actually gather information about what this is rather than just talking around it?
Welcome to the Daily Soul Bytes Show. I am your host, Bolaabimbola, frequency alchemist, life coach, and energy practitioner. Daily Soul Bytes is where we have guest authors, coaches, and entrepreneurs from the fields of spirituality, psychology, and leadership, sharing their insights for the expansion of collective consciousness. And today I have a very special guest, Xandra Hawes. Welcome to the show, Xandra.
Yay. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm going to read a bit about your bio before we start. Xandra Hawes is a psychotherapist interweaving the worlds of Buddhist psychology, spirituality, and energy healing. Drawing from contemplative psychotherapy, Buddhist psychology, and energy healing, she helps her clients heal trauma, develop their intuition, and connect with their soul's purpose. That is so powerful. I love the different aspects of your work. And I'd love to ask you, Xandra, how did you get to this place where you are now really blending the, psychology and spirituality, as well as energy healing? How did you come to, what's that journey that led you to this place?
Yeah. I think like most of us, right? It's part of the wounded healer journey of like when we're young, right? Going through things, having certain challenges come up. For me, when I was really, really young, I could not figure out why I felt energy so strongly. And I always used to apologize to people if I was sitting next to a classmate in, grade school and they got a bad grade on a test. I could instantly feel myself metabolizing their field. And I would look at them and say, like, I'm sorry. And they'd be like, why are you sorry? And there was this sense of, I don't know where I end and start and where someone else ends and starts. And so it was this constant trying to be in relationship and just loving humans, just being obsessed with how cool humans are. My whole life, I've been like, oh, I love humans. Why don't I feel like one? And so it was magic learning so young and going through a few like difficult experiences. And luckily, I had a great relationship and still do with my mother. And I told her what was going on. I was like, I think I'm sad and I think I'm anxious, but I also think I'm overstimulated and there's all this energy happening. And she said, well, it seems like we need to find you someone. And I remember telling her at first, and she was talking to her friends, and she was like, I think I have a child from The Sixth Sense. I don't really know what to do. Like the movie The Sixth Sense. And we were joking about it. And so she said, why don't we bring you to a therapist? And then why don't we bring you to a psychic medium? And so I started kind of finding those two tracks in that world of like, oh, this concept is really, really helpful for me to understand how the ego and how my mind is working. And I was like, oh, on a spiritual level, this makes a lot of sense. So I played a lot going into like social work and wanting like justice and equality for all humans. But I was like, but something's missing here. And then I would go into these spiritual realms and meditation things and go, oh, whoa, but there's deeper concepts that are here. So I've always been finding that intersection of kind of interweaving both of them. And then I was in my first master's degree program, which was holistic health studies. And it looked at the intersection between Eastern and Western medicine. I was thinking about acupuncture of like, okay, maybe this is it. And the first day of my classes in my master's program, a woman came in and sat next to me and she said, I was debating between this program and then there's a Buddhist psychology program in Colorado. And I was like, oh God, shut your ears. You're already in your master's program. You can't switch. You can't do it. And so I ended up getting 1 degree in that and then skipping over and moving to Colorado in the United States and doing a Buddhist psychology program. And that finally hit the nail on the head where there was so much intrinsic wisdom that I discovered while also bringing in these concepts of mind. And so I just love this intersection. And that's sort of where I've stayed truly and have been interweaving from there. Yeah.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. Thank you so much, Xandra, because I love the way you, from a very young child, could sense energy and you were able to flow with it. Because a lot of the times when we are sensing something that is different from that very, very real projection, that physical reality, it's very uncomfortable. And those around us do not necessarily encourage us to connect and explore. And I love the fact that you had a mother who was very keen to enable you to explore different aspects and you flowed with it. So that's really powerful. It reminds me of my mother. My mother had books at home and I read Who Am I by Ramana Maharishi. And that really helped me to understand the physical ego self and the higher self. Now those two really can interact, but there is a self that is never changing and there's a physical ego self that is constantly in that state of flux. So I do value the impact of our parents and how they guide our different aspects of our lives. So tell us, Xandra, what is Buddhist psychology? How would you define it for those who have never heard of that term before?
Yeah. You know, the way that I define it is sort of based off of the creator that kind of brought it over. His name is Trungpa Rinpoche. He originally grew up in Tibet, and then when a lot of the invasions happened in Tibet, he led a group of beings through and over the Himalayas and then landed in England and actually studied there and was in England for quite some time and then came over to the United States. So he sort of brought that Eastern root system of Buddhism and then started studying psychology in England and was like, oh, okay. And then I don't know, got drawn to the US. I'm not sure about that part of it, but he was sort of one of the first beings to sort of establish a school and to sort of establish that branch because psychology, in itself is a pretty new field. Most people know Freud and some of the quote unquote like grandfather, right, creators supposedly of sort of psychology, but really not from like a feminist perspective. The original psychology was very much so based on studying mostly male identified people. So a lot of the information was really only on certain people, a lot of times young men, things of that nature. And so Trungpa Rinpoche essentially came in and proposed a concept that's pretty big in Buddhist psychology called basic goodness or brilliant sanity. And what those terms mean, basic goodness, they don't necessarily use this word. I tend to, and I'm sure you can feel into this with me, but basic goodness really just means soul. It means this ancient, wise, intuitive knowing beyond time, beyond space, beyond this life, really, that's at the core of our being. And as humans, oftentimes we grow up eventually. In order to be on this planet, most people have to develop some sort of ego system in order to have judgment, in order to have boundaries, in order to, have this is right, right? This is wrong. There's some sort of duality that starts getting built. And so it's sort of Buddhist psychology doesn't say that ego component isn't bad, but what happens is years and years and years of layers of programming layer on. And a lot of times people's soul essence or their basic goodness or their brilliant sanity, that core self gets really, really covered up. And so a lot of times traditional psychotherapy has been like more doctor kind of centered of like, I'm the doctor. I'm, the expert and you're the patient. And I'm just going to give you advice about what you're doing wrong, essentially. And Buddhist psychology really moves that out of the way and says the therapist can only be as helpful as far as they can see the soul of the client sitting in front of them. Because if you can't see the basic goodness and you can just see the neurotic or the patterns or the diagnoses, you are not holding the frequency of who they actually are and what you're helping them kind of come home and root into. And those are my words or my understandings of it. But it's a lot more holistic. It's a lot more allowing people's authentic selves to rise up in front of you. And there's a resonance and a responsibility as a Buddhist therapist in my mind, because you are always practicing and coming home to that ground in yourself, so that it's like a lighthouse. You're holding that energy so that folks can recognize it in themselves and go, oh, I have that energy in me as well. So it's an ongoing practice to take on Buddhist psychology and actually live from that place and actually honor people from that place. It's a lot more honoring and less about power or hierarchy, and about helping people to come home to who they really are.
Mm, thank you. That's really wonderful, Xandra. Because I think these modalities, there's no one hat that fits all, and there are those who have come. We've all come to explore different things, and some modalities will work for others, and some will not. And I really resonate with the Buddhist psychotherapy and the Buddhist psychology, and I would like to find out those who come to work with you. I know you are focused on getting that soul's purpose to become much more visible. It's always there. It's always there. It's just that we're not always conscious of it. And I would love you to tell us, those who come to work with you, how do you weave those different aspects of Buddhist psychotherapy, or Buddhist psychology rather, psychotherapy and energy healing, which I know you also do. I'm also an energy healer. I do quantum Reiki energy healing. It's about really activating the meridians within us based on how I'm led by my guides. There's a lot of light language as well in the work that I do. So those who come to work with you, what can they expect in terms of the modalities that you would bring together, and how they can really become much more aware of that soul's purpose that is always there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Typically, when folks come in, and people reach out for a lot of different reasons, right? A lot of folks will say, I think I'm struggling with depression, right? Or I think I'm struggling with anxiety. And so when they're coming in, I have a really silly whiteboard. I'm a big fan of whiteboards and markers. And we make what's called a heart map, where I sort of write their name and I say, let's imagine that 6 months from now, certain things are happening that you've always wanted. Or if we flip it, certain things aren't happening anymore. Like, what frequency, what picture would you love to happen? And so we really make a map, because what I find sometimes, I get a lot of what I call therapy veterans, where there are folks that are like, I've been in therapy for years and talk therapy, and I know my story, and I could repeat it back and forth with my eyes closed, but just because I know what happened, for some reason I can't seem to let it go. I can't really move on from that space. So sometimes I get babies that have never been in therapy before, or I seem to get veterans on both sides. And so either way, we sort of make this map and we look at, okay, what what hasn't worked before? What have you tried? Because a lot of my folks are very spiritually evolved folks, so they're dabbling in all different things, right? I have folks that are coming in and practicing light language. I have folks that are coming in and they're like, I'm just learning how to be in a crowd and not get overwhelmed. Or I'm learning how to be part of my family system and work with anger. Or how do I talk with my guides? And so we really get a map of this like whole person, body, mind, and spirit. And then from that place, a lot of times we put together like a blueprint. And so if someone is working a lot in like a highly sensitive person sort of space, where highly sensitive person isn't technically right a diagnosis, it's more like of a pop culture kind of understanding of folks that are sort of on the sensitivity spectrum. And so someone who's a highly sensitive person might be working a lot on relational energy. How do I maintain my field and be in connection with people? And so we will bring in sometimes attachment theory. Okay, based off of your programming, how did you learn how to be attached to certain people and not to others? And how does that actually impact your energy field? How does that impact your chakra system about which ones are actually more depleted and more inward and which ones are actually more vibrant and outward? And so sometimes that would be teaching chakra system based stuff and kind of helping people understand this is where this comes from, and really honoring again the lineages where some of these things are happening. And then again, combining and looking at attachment style, looking at relational dynamics. What I find happens is that the mind really tries to keep us safe from the deeper emotions. And so oftentimes we'll make a map of how do I feel about this? And then we actually use a lot of somatic practices for people to learn how do I build my window of tolerance for some of these feelings that I keep avoiding, that I keep moving away from. And so sometimes we start small, and I will actually just have people using kind of visualization techniques go toward the energy and start creating curiosity for judgment. How do we get curious about what's here? How do we just build your window of tolerance of sitting in this discomfort in your body so that we can actually gather information about what this is rather than just talking around it for years, essentially, right? Some of my folks are very spiritual, and they come in already aware of deeper chakra systems. And so we're bringing in different guides or who inspires them. We're working on kind of even going into self-healing, DNA, cellular level based things. Some folks are coming in with a deep awareness of their past lives, and maybe there's trauma relationally in this life with someone with a last life. So then I use a lot of hypnotherapy based things where we're going in and journeying and things like that. So um, the list goes on and on. The list goes on and on about depending on how someone works. How are we interweaving the psychological components of the family system and trauma? And how do we bring in the spiritual component depending on where they are in their spiritual journey, what they want to learn? It's very fluid and flowing depending on where the person is, but that's why we make the map at the beginning so that we can really refer back to it around like, okay, this is your vision. How do we really get you there? Especially for my therapy veterans, usually they've spent years like kind of being stuck. Sometimes I think that's maybe a contract with themselves around, continuing to seek and learn. And so I don't want to disrupt that cycle. But if people actually want to let it go, we help them figure out how to do it.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a lot of modalities that you use. And
Yes.
how long do you work with a client for? Is it for eight weeks or 8 months, or how do you work?
Yeah.
How long do you
Yeah.
work?
It's a good question because, yeah, sometimes I do spiritual life coaching, right? And there's like packages sometimes where you're like, hey, and you're kind of prescribing, like, okay, this is how I think this long, it might take. What's interesting is, as a therapist, is I usually tell folks typically, if you want to move things fast, meeting weekly or bi-weekly are going to be your best options. If you meet monthly, that's more of like a check-in, but half the time, if I'm doing a 55-minute meeting with someone and I haven't seen them for a month, they have to be very organized and very specific around what they work on. Otherwise, they're catching me up on so many different pieces and loose threads and this over here and there, that it just tends to be a lot slower. So I have some folks that come in and they're like, hey, I want to work on this and then I'm moving in 4 months. And I'm like, awesome. Okay. Let's see what we can get done in that amount of time. Let's see if we can really hold your vision. And I'm pretty honest with people around like, if you have a really big vision and you want to get it done in 4 months, you're going to have to be my homework client where we're really, really planning. If we're working on a meditation in session, I'm recording it and I'm saying, you're going to have to do this once a day so that you can really move through the energy, right? I have some folks that are going to school to be Buddhist therapists. I see a lot of therapists, nurses, teachers at Naropa, different folks throughout the years, lots of different folks. And there are some people I've been with for 4 years that just love coming, and we're constantly working on different pieces of their lives. I'm trying to think the longest person. Yeah, I have some folks that are in their 60s and 70s and are retired, and they're working on how, when I leave this planet, do I leave it in the most peaceful place possible? And so sometimes we are working on this life, but sometimes we're going backwards through other lives, and we're actually clearing energy there so that they are as evolved as they can before the spirit leaves the body. And so that's just more of, that's just ongoing and open, because it's less about, I want to overcome anxiety, and more, it's less tangible and more intuitive based off of their energy and what they're noticing being
Mm,
released from their space.
mm, mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. I am
Yeah.
picking up on how much intuition will be coming into your work, how much you'll
Mm.
be intuiting into your own guides, your own higher self to guide you. How how does intuition play into your work?
Mm.
How do you support? Because obviously you are tapping into your own intuition in order to help your clients cultivate theirs. For those who are wanting to cultivate that intuition, what are the kind of steps that you have actually gone through? Because I know what I am, it's actually a journey, as far as intuition is concerned. It gets deeper at different levels because there are different versions of us that we are, what we deeply understood or the meanings deeply held um, before. Um, Maybe in the last day or two may shift, and we're learning another level. So it's always in levels. So what steps would you say your clients are supported to go through to help them to develop their next levels as empowered beings of intuition?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree so much with you there on the level piece, right? I think a lot of times people have a sense of, I just want to like be so close and connected with my intuition, but what our idea of intuition is, and like, again, the levels or the layers in it totally evolve over time. And I suppose my journey has been mostly through learning how to work with deep clairsentience. That's been a big one for me. And a lot of the folks that I see that are more highly sensitive or empathic are really working with that on steroids. So I always kind of start, if someone's wanting to really work with intuition, we kind of have a lesson where we focus in all the different types of clairs. What are the different ways that people's intuition come through? Um, I had a client years ago. She's just the most amazing being, and I was like, let's like look at the clairs. So we wrote them all down, and I sort of explained them, and then had her kind of feel into her own heart space as I was talking about them. And I said, 0 to 10, 10 being like, wow, yeah, this is totally, I get this, I understand this, and 0 being like, this is really foreign. It feels not similar to my experience. And we had her rate all the different ones, and it was so funny. Like clairaudience was really, really high for her around just like, oh, I've always heard words, or I've always kind of heard a guide sort of speaking to me. I've always felt like these nudges and kind of heard it more audio wise. And I've always had clairsentience. But when we talked about clear cognizance, clear knowing for the self, she was like, that is the hardest one for me. And it made me smile because it's the hardest sometimes one for me as well. When I worked doing psychic medium readings for years, it was fascinating how much information I could get for other people. And then when it came to me, I'd be like, should I move? Should I not move? Should I buy this car? What do you guys think? And so I have a lot of empathy for that process of like um, having different types of intuition, and how to really like own the ones that maybe are life stories, or perhaps we came in with bigger muscles around, and then deciding how we want to expand in that way. Um, and so again, this is more from the clairsentience sort of perspective, but seeing that I see so many folks that are like, the world energetically is on steroids. How do I manage that? A lot of times we have to get that under control before we can actually trust intuition, because most folks have a fear of being wrong or messing it up, or not saying the right things, or what if their mind takes over? What if they're crazy? I always hear constantly, what if I'm making it up? So we really have to work with, where did that story come from? Who didn't validate your experience growing up where you started questioning yourself? Was it the world? Was it a system, right? Is it our wider culture? right? Who invalidated your beingness and being able to trust? Sometimes at a basic level, most parents are doing the best that they can, of course, but most parents don't mirror their children's emotions back. So kids don't understand whether or not their emotions are real, because most parents are afraid of their kids' emotions, right? Under this idea that they have to make their kids happy all the time. So even I've seen kids where I work with some psychic children, and sometimes they're 12 or 13 and they don't trust their experience of whether they're seeing a spirit in the room or whether their brain's making it up. And I'll talk with mom and be like, oh, okay, like, how was this kid emotionally growing up? And like, how did you work with that? And sometimes parents want their kids to be so happy all the time that if a kid comes home and says, oh, I was the last person in class to learn how to draw a car. We were practicing drawing cars today or something. Most parents will go, oh, honey, no, but you're so good at this thing, right? Or, oh, maybe let's go get some ice cream. And the problem is that if you can't sit with your kids' emotions and mirror back to them, what happens is you're teaching your kids that you don't know how to be with their bigger emotions. You're actually afraid of them and avoiding them. And
Mhm.
so sometimes even kids growing up, if they never had emotional mirroring, they actually don't know how to trust what's a feeling, what's intuition, right? What's old energy. So we sort of start almost like a tree at the root system of how do we use energy clearing to clear out the doubt, to clear out the fear? Where is that located in the body, organs, chakra systems? And we start building a practice to clean the energy out so they can understand what's my emotions, what's others, what are my feelings.
Mhm.
And then they can start trusting that inner knowing. Basically, that can come through. It becomes a lot more clear and they're more aware of what their frequency is. So we start a little bit more in the root system and then kind of work our way up into the intuitive branches, I guess you could call it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I love
Mm-hmm.
that. And I love the word trust because this is really how that physical ego self and all the different parts really comes to surrender to that higher
Mm-hmm.
self, which is really where we are being guided from, whether it's through the words or through the visions or through sensations. And I know that trust is something that is, it's quite difficult a lot of the times, and there are different levels of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a book, Daily Soul Bytes, about how we can become more aware of the different perspectives within us, because we all have those negative perspectives, which are usually based on fear, and the positive perspectives, which are usually based around love and forgiveness and gratitude. And coming to be aware of those two different perspectives allows us to align to really what we prefer or what we know will give us our best outcomes. But that takes practice. How do you support your clients when they come to you, when they may or may not be aware of the different perspectives? And know, because sometimes when a thought comes to your mind, I'm not enough. I um, I do not have the right resources to do this. There is also a thought that also exists at the same time that you are enough and you can do this. But being aware of the two thoughts and aligning takes practice. And we sometimes do need to get help to do it. How do you support your clients, Xandra, when they come to you to understand those different perspectives, beliefs, and how do they come to align and trust? Because that trust requires them to know, first of all, that those perspectives exist, and then they need to surrender to it. How do you support them to go through that?
Think in psychology, right, there's all these different modalities and all these different branches or ways that you can support clients. And some of them are evidence based, right, where they're like, oh, people with this cluster of symptoms seem to respond really well to this type of treatment. And I love dabbling the ones that I call are the most wooey, but still like under the psychology hat. That's like, oh, this is evidence based, right? See, and one of the biggest ones that I love is called internal family systems or IFS and parts work. And so I sort of see, right, like when I'm sitting across from a human, there's, like you were saying, to use the word again, layers. It's almost like seeing each human as like a pie chart, right? There's all these different like little tiny sections. And depending on the amount of trust we have in those certain parts, some of them are bigger than others because they've been fed and they've been given a lot of energy. And then they've created neural pathways in the brain that are really strong and end up getting lit up, whether we want them to be or not. Um, there's something I love teaching to clients where I say your brain is like a Google search. So if you are invited to a new friend's event and you're starting to feel a little bit anxious, maybe an hour beforehand, and you're noticing and you say, oh, like, why am I so afraid right now? You ask yourself that. Your brain does a Google search of the top results of whatever you've thought the most about yourself, regardless of whether it's kind or not. And so if you say, oh, I'm feeling anxious right now, I wonder why. And your brain goes, oh, let me check our like Rolodex of information. Oh, it's because you're not enough. And you go, oh, I'm not feeling enough. Why am I not feeling enough? And then all of a sudden it starts listing all these reasons or all these things that are wrong with you. And so the brain is just this incredible supercomputer that doesn't always take into account the emotional health of the information that it has stored. And so I tell folks a lot of times it's really important to use meditation and mindfulness, one, to get really clear on that process. Because if you can create, most people are just living in the I, and the goal is to actually lean back into the we. Instead of I'm having this experience, it's noticing this part of me is having this experience. And so much of the work I do is meditation and mindfulness. But from that place, then we start doing more parts work. And so sometimes that will be a mixture of like hypnotherapy and where we do parts work. And so, for instance, I had one client years ago that was coming in and working on just like, I'm always anxious and I can't figure out how to not be anxious. And I explained to them and said, anxiety is resistance to a feeling. It's not actually a core feeling. Anxiety is usually resisting something that's there that we don't actually want to come in contact with. And so there's this flighty energy of not wanting to be in relationship with something. So I said, if we do this together, almost like we walk towards it together, can we explore maybe what that is? And so I sort of guide this person into like some visualizations, calming the body down. And then when we bring parts work in, I have them pick a place that they love. They picked like a place in nature. And so we imagine meeting at that place in nature and we start going down the path. And I start using hypnotherapy to start walking them back through time. Because I said, where do you think this energy comes from? And they picked an age. So we imagined walking back to that age to where that energy was and actually started dialoguing with that part. What is that part saying to you? What's their belief? Who do they feel connected to? What are they longing for? What are their dreams? How do we get clear on what that part is actually wanting or saying? And then how do we actually embrace that part? So I'll have clients do energy healing themselves on that part in this visualization. And then we have them bring that energy forward. So multidimensionally through time, they start weaving that energy through. And then I tell them, you are the spirit guide for you then. So it's like sometimes spirit guides, I don't really believe time is linear. It is on this planet to a certain point, but I believe we often in the present are the spirit guides for us in the past if we actually do energy work in this way. So we sort of have them dialogue, come into contact with that part, and then start doing energy healing. And so they can start noticing, oh, that's not me in present time. That's actually this old part. Or, oh, that wasn't actually me at all. That was something that, maybe someone in the family created a lie about who I was. And I took that on and I created this whole part that needed to rebel my whole life in order to have the space that I needed to trust my own wisdom. So you're kind of getting the sense, right? Again, it's a lot of weaving of different modalities. Even when I talk, I'm like, dang, those are like four different things. We're all like, I'm like kind of patchworking together here, but it's the easiest way to sort of explain your question about how do people work with the different aspects of self, and how do they come in contact with it and learn not to feed it essentially anymore. And it sounds like it's a big part of your work too, to help people kind of say like, you are not who you think you are in a lot of ways.
Mm. And
Mhm.
There is some. Thank you for that, Xandra. Really, really intricate work you're doing, because there is something about us understanding that we are these different parts in that physical self, but
Mhm.
also accepting all those parts and loving all those parts. Because yes, some parts are bigger than others, but each and every part, as it emerges, as it unfolds in along that timeline, does need to feel safe, does need to feel secure, does need to feel loved, you know. So there is a need for us to continue that journey, but to remember in the process, in all of that, that we are actually infinite beings, and that true self, our true self, is actually in spirit. Authenticity of those parts comes from allowing that spirit self to drive each of them, to lead, to love, to accept each of them. And I really want to talk about soul's purpose, because at the end of the day, this is what really helps us to allow that spirit to drive the parts. Each part needs to understand what the purpose of it is in that different aspect. Because I may have a part as a mother, I may have a part as a sister, as a daughter, as a coach, as an advocate, and each of them will need each of those parts of me I have to love, have to feel safe, and I have to come to surrender to that spirit self and understand the purpose, the soul's purpose. How do you work with that? How do you get your clients, as you weave all those different modalities, to come to a place where those parts? I also use, you're right, I use the internal family systems of Dr. Richard Swartz in my work as well. Honestly, there are different modalities, but I think that one is really brilliant. I understand it, and it made sense to me. And so I do use it, and I'm glad that I love the fact that you use it as well. How do you support your clients to come to that place of allowing the soul's purpose to drive their different parts in a way that each part is understanding and loving the other, because the voices never end. This is the thing about meditation. Sometimes we think that meditation is about having no thoughts, but it's really about us allowing the thoughts to be. As a parent of a 26-year-old, I know what it's like when, you know, taking over. It's like having the physical ego in your space and deciding that they're going to do exactly what they like in your space, and you can't throw them out. You can't, do anything about it, but you still have to love it. Having to love our kids as grown men, 40-year-old or 30-year-old still at home sometimes. Um, and really allowing those parts to be, but be driven by the purpose of the soul, that true self. How do you do that with your clients?
Yeah. Well, I guess what I find, and it's lovely that you're bringing this up. I was talking to one of my dear friends about this, and he's um, in his early 60s and has had just the most incredible career in life, just working in different countries and just very successful careers in business and art and becoming a therapist and just a wonderful father. And we were talking about soul mission and purpose. And I think when folks are young, right, a lot of the culture that I see, especially in the United States, really puts a lot of pressure on you need to figure out who you are based off of your career and what you do. And so there's so much pressure around, well, how are you going to make money and how are you going to, trade your time and energy in the future? And so many folks grow up with the programming of I'm a human doing instead of a human being. And I think that gets really, really confusing in a world where it's true we have to create livelihoods for ourselves in order to exchange, right, for the things that we need. And so typically when I see folks kind of coming in and they're on that soul journey of awakening, they're all different places.
Mm.
Sometimes I have folks where it just appears as like a deep longing. They're just like, there's this unquenchable longing for something that I can't even put my finger on, but I know more about what feels wrong than what feels right. And that's sometimes my folks that are coming in that might identify as being more in a depression space because they feel that because they haven't figured that out, that everyone else has. And I could talk hours about how social media just really reinforces those negative ideas that people are behind. So sometimes I have folks starting in that place, and we're really working gently on that ground of how do you rediscover who you are, your core essence, what lights you up, and learning how to really find play and curiosity and creativity so that the soul can actually start coming through. Because I guess I have the belief that even though there is so much responsibility in some ways of being a soul on this planet, especially right now, there's a lot of radical responsibility. But I also think there's a piece or a sliver that the soul is here for its own joy, to experience its own joy and to come from that place of supporting other people's joy. And so, again, sometimes soul mission or soul purpose or soul essence coming back to me, sometimes they all sort of interweave together in a way, because it feels like in my work, when I'm really plugged in to my higher self and higher knowing, my mission sometimes changes, right? There's this idea, I think, when I was younger, I was like, okay, I need to become this in order to complete this mission, so my ego feels really good about like what it's doing here, kind of this martyr helper sort of archetype. And then I ended up actually working with autoimmune and working with a lot of health things that were me being a water fountain where I was giving so much energy out, but not putting the same amount in. And so it's interesting, the soul's journey and the soul's mission to me every few years, as this opening of who I really am continues, the purpose and the mission actually becomes more about my maintenance of a certain frequency in myself and moving from that place and meeting whatever challenge, may it be karmic or not, that sort of comes. And even the other day I checked in and said, hey guys, higher self, my team, whoever's all up there, it changes sometimes. I said, can you give me a word, sort of like what layer my sort of soul purpose is on right now? And they said, your work is to really hold the frequency of peacekeeper, because peace is what's truly needed in the world. And if you can hold that frequency in yourself, there's a chance that it could be held externally. But until you find that resonance in yourself, it's a fractal representation of what's still happening out there. So your work is to really focus in on that right now. And I'm like, great, thank you. I got a little bit more of a puzzle piece. And so sometimes I find myself, right, longing for all the puzzle pieces so that I can totally make the puzzle. And I think I did when I was younger and needed that like ego confirmation of like, I'm doing it right.
Mm.
And I have found the more that I hold expectation for who I'm supposed to be, the more I really limit what I can tap into. And so I often tell folks, if there's a longing, like I said, when you start at that longing level, all the way up to sometimes folks changing careers or doing different things, it's working with coming home and working with maintaining frequency and maintaining that channel so that we can get the puzzle pieces or directions as life switches. Because as you know, it sounds like you're learning a lot around how to really like honor change and honor like what happens moment to moment as a being, but also in your family system. And so sometimes we have periods of stability, and sometimes we have periods of just like, okay, this is what's happening right now. And like, how do I embrace this? I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's sort of like what I'm learning on soul purpose and guiding people back there. And sometimes people are starting smaller, and sometimes people are like, I know my mission. And if I get too set in my mission, I actually block out the potential to grow and expand in other directions based off of needing to stay in a certain lane out of like familiarity or control, I suppose.
Mm, I love that. Thank you. Yes, you know, I love what you said about the layers and how it evolves. That purpose does evolve. And we are living in this reality where the masculine energies are much more dominant. And I love what you
Mhm.
said about, that's, the doing, which we have to do, we do have to take action, even as beings of intuitive power. We still have to get that guidance coming through and take action to move forward. So it's that balance. So I love the yin and yang symbol. And no matter what work those different parts are doing, there is always the need for them to find balance. And there is always a line, a thin thread of something that is common to each and every one of those parts. I know that for me, I do have a passion for self-awareness, unlocking a deeper self-awareness, the next level of self-awareness, because it
Mhm.
never ends. What you were aware of yesterday in that version of yourself, or in this moment of this momentary version of yourself, is going to be different. There's another level of self-awareness that you will need to begin to have. It's like the person who is craving for a relationship or longing for a relationship, and that version of them is longing for a relationship, and they meet that partner who they have dreamed of, who they have done the work, and the reflection shows up in the reality. The version of them who actually meets that person is different from the version of them who are single, and they find themselves thinking, okay, this part of me now, what is it really wanting to do? But there is a, a thread, a sequence of purpose, a sequence of passion, a sequence of desire that is running through. It may be to connect, it may be to be more aware of themselves, but that sequence, knowing what that sequence is so key. Across time and space, there's a sequence that the soul really cherishes. And understanding that really makes life easier. You can you can tick the boxes quite quicker. As you're searching for that partner, you're ticking quite quickly. No, not for me, no, not for me. You're a bit clearer. Knowing the soul purpose really allows us to be much, much clearer, and it makes it easy for us to flow with life. So I love that you refer to your own reflections. So thank you for that. And do you have any kind of final words to say to us, to say, Xandra, around this issue of soul purpose and using the different modalities that you use? Anyone listening to this, how they can come to accept the different parts of themselves, and how we can really come to flow more with life, knowing or being much more connected to our soul's purpose.
I work to help people bring in self compassion and kindness and letting go of judgment. And sometimes it's as small as having people do activities where they just spend 5 minutes a day and they imagine writing out the words, I'm learning to like you. I'm learning to love you. And I imagine almost like a jar in the heart, and they place that note in the heart. And they just imagine every day adding that note, adding that affirmation to the self. And then we slowly incorporate some of Louise Hay's work, where the mirror work, where you stand in front of the mirror and you start saying it, you start embodying this. I'm learning to accept all of myself. So if we can try to find peace in the self so that these other frequencies can start to wiggle their way through the cracks, usually that's where a lot of the insights will start coming in. These cracks start to happen where the wider universe, the higher self, starts being able to break through because the mind is not on the tape or the loop, that just keeps recreating this isolation sort of mindset for people. And so, a lot of times, with a lot of love, um, I tell people, like, you really have to allow yourself to be creative with it. You really have to allow yourself to write it down, imagine it, start like creating a metaphor, for your life of like beauty, living in joy. Um, and so Yeah, a lot of times it's perhaps really subtle in a way, but when people come back to that quest to, in a simple way, am I choosing love or am I choosing fear? If I can continue to try to choose love, all of it's going to start breaking through if I stop making decisions out of fear and noticing how much fear might actually be programming the same outcome over and over and over again.
Mhm. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sandra. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining me today. Where can people find you when they want to connect with you, Sandra?
The easiest place is just a simple website, and it's soulessencepsychotherapy.com.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
again for joining me today, Sandra.
Thank you so much for this interview. Thank you so much for weaving with me and for bringing your magic into the world. It's huge. It's huge, and I can feel your resonance. So I'm so glad you have this amazing medicine that you're weaving through the ethers for people to kind of come home to themselves. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us. And I would like to thank our listeners and those who are watching to connect with Sandra. She's doing some wonderful work, moving, using a lot of different modalities and really supporting the understanding, the acceptance of different parts of us, as well as understanding the soul's purpose. That is so powerful. So I really encourage you to connect with Xandra and to subscribe to Daily Soul Bytes Show. We always have new episodes every Wednesday. And to connect with me, if you have any questions or if you do want to work with me, I welcome you. And I look forward to seeing you on the very next episode of the Daily Soul Bytes Show. Bye bye.